For me, looking back on 2020, it was more the images than the words that have been burnt into my brain. Photographs that capture the relentless, unimaginable pain and occasional joy of this past year. Thankfully, there are plenty of great ones to choose from. The Boston Press Photographers Association picked out the best, now on display in their first ever outdoor exhibit, sponsored in part by GBH. It's now in Copley Square and will move to Justice Gordine Park in Nubian Square next month. I'm joined now by two of the featured photographers, Jessica Rinaldi of the Boston Globe, who was named Photographer of the Year, and Brian Snyder of Reuters, who won Best in Show. Brian, Jessica, congratulations to both of you and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jessica, was 2020 the hardest year for you to do what you do for a living?
Yes, 100%. I've done this job for
Why?
20 years. I can't imagine a harder time to go out because we were really fearful every day for our safety, for our health, for the safety of our subjects who we were coming into contact with, for our families. It was a scary time, but it felt like very important to go out and do it because it was the biggest story that's ever happened in my lifetime here.
You know, Brian, when half of people's faces are often missing, what do you lose as a photographer?
I certainly made it more challenging. I don't think we realized how much we relied on the bottom half of people's faces to communicate emotion until we no longer had it as an option. But I mean, you know, the cliche is always about what you can see in people's eyes, and that remained true.
You know, one thing that didn't change this year, Brian, is covering grief and pain. There was just so much more of it. Did it feel almost inappropriate to capture and celebrate joy in your work?
No. I think, I mean, isn't that part of the definition of resilience? Part of the definition of getting through it? No, I think it would be inappropriate not to include it in proportion, but to not include it would be not portraying how people get through day to day.
Jessica, you agree with that?
I do. I think that a big part of what we do is we try to capture our shared humanity, and there are many different levels to that and layers to that. And I think that while this was a very tough year, there were moments of joy, and we can't look past that either. So, yeah, I agree with Brian.
So let's look at some of your award-winning work. Brian, I'm going to show you a couple of things you did and give me a reflection or a description. We'll start with one where there was a face or two totally uncovered while others around her were covered. Here it is. Where was this from?
This was from a protest that started in Franklin Park and moved. There's a police station nearby, and this was outside. It was getting dark, and this was on the sort of the blurry part in the foreground of the lines of the helmets of the police sort of dividing people.
Let's move to a sort of a quieter piece of a demonstration in something you took, Brian, capturing people inside and outside. Tell us about that.
One of the things about the protests was, I mean, part of the point of protesting is to get attention, to get other people to look. So if you can show that in your pictures, that's a big part of the point of the whole event is what do other people reacting? What are they seeing?
And third, two people in the medical profession. This one's really powerful, I think. Where are they?
So this is outside of Brigham and Women's. What's interesting, I think, about this is it brings a lot of two of the biggest stories last year together. These are nurses that work in a hospital. They're treating COVID patients, but they're out protesting for racial justice. So it's sort of combined, you know, that's two of the biggest stories coming together.
Jessica, let's turn to you for a second and start with a pretty jarring photo. I think people will agree. Preparing workers moving a coffin, and then we can see someone lying in a coffin in the foreground.
This was such a difficult thing to have to photograph, but it felt very important to show how overwhelmed these funeral home workers were. They've never encountered anything like this. And in normal times, they would do, maybe a dozen funerals a month. In April last year, they did 71. So they were just overflowing in the room that they were in. That was normally would be a tribute room, and it was full of caskets. So I felt like it was really important to show that, just to make it real for people that this was really very much happening.
Well, the second photograph makes it real too. There's only one casket in this photograph, but you not only capture the destruction that this year wrought, but also how people had to observe the death of someone they loved.
Yeah, I think that, nobody wants to be the person that turns up to a funeral home with a camera, right? But again, it just felt like really important to show what these families were going through. This loss was really very real for a lot of people, and they were too afraid to come and grieve for many of them to leave the house. So they were very small services and just a handful of family members there. You could hear a pin drop.
And thirdly, no physical distancing in this one. Where was this taken?
This was a Black Lives Matter protest. This is on the Boston Common. I thought it was really important for us to go out there and to document this, because look at all of these people taking a stand, braving the pandemic, putting their health at risk to go and fight, racial injustice. It was a very powerful thing to see.
Jessica, is there anything you learned as a photographer this year that will change the way you do your work post-pandemic?
I think I learned that I'm tougher than I thought I was. But I also think that I learned that people are really very resilient and we're adaptable, and that even in the hardest of times, there are people who are willing to share their stories with us. And I will take that with me, just the gratefulness of that.
Brian, how about you?
Yeah, a renewed faith in the people that we go out and tell their stories, like the way they welcomed us and opened themselves up, and it was remarkable. And a newfound faith in our profession. Everyone whose work is out there, all of my colleagues, we have friends that died. It's newfound faith in the photojournalists and journalism.
Let me tell you, you both captured the year as perfectly as any two I've seen. I congratulate you on your work and thank you for spending a little bit of time with me.
Thank you.